Everyone, welcome back to the Cohesion Podcast. My name is Shawn, and today we're joined by two guests. We've got Donald Knight, venture partner at Valor Ventures, and Miriam Connaughton, the Chief People Officer and Experience Officer at Simpplr. Donald and Miriam, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shawn. Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Well, your timing was great on who goes first or who doesn't. This is the first time we've gone with two people. I'll have to point out who talks when we go through this. But yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. I'm really excited.
Test of your hosting skills. You're up to it, Shawn. We know.
Well, awesome. Well, I have a couple of questions. We call them icebreakers. Really, it's just a chance to get to know you a little more as humans instead of fancy SVP, Chief People and Experience Officers. So the first one is for you, Donald. What's an insult that you've received that you're proud of?
Ooh, that's a really good question. You could tell you didn't tell us this in advance. I would have had an answer prepared. You know what it is? The biggest insult that I got that I think was a compliment is that I was bossy. But let me tell you why. I have a tendency. This is really good. It's a good one. So my mom and dad were military, so they were very big on manners. And so I always default to ladies first, or if I hold the door, I hold the door for everybody. And there was this older gentleman that was coming through, and I said ladies first because there were ladies behind me. And so he just decided to just wait. And I was like, oh no, we'll do young age before beauty. So I wanted him to go first. And he was like, I know, that's why I'm waiting on you. And I was like, well, I can wait all day. And he was like, well, you're the bossy one. So he was calling me bossy because I wanted him to go first, but it's because I wanted to make him feel young again and somewhat give myself a nod at being beautiful. So that's probably the biggest insult I got, that I was pretty cool with that one.
Fantastic. You know what, Miriam, I'm going to ask you the same question just because I'm super curious now.
There you go. You gave me a bit longer to think about it. Yeah, my nickname growing up in my family is the boss. So that's something else we've got in common there, Don. I was a bossy little child. But no, I think one I got earlier in my career, and in the context, I was quite proud of it because it was a bit of a difficult situation. And this person told me that I was intellectually intimidating. I'm thinking I'll take that any day of the week. So...
Fantastic.
By the way, I don't think I am, but he thought I was. So I thought, okay, that's what you think. I'll take it.
Great. Well, Donald, we know what to look forward to during this conversation. Yeah, intellectual intimidation and two bossy people. So we've got Miriam. What are the top 5 most opened apps on your phone?
The most open apps. Oh, that's a good one. So it's actually WhatsApp. So I've had a lot with my family members and friends through WhatsApp around the world, that's for sure. That, email, obviously. BBC, that's my news source, often on that. And because I travel a reasonable amount, BritBox, which is an online streaming service. It's a lot of all the British stuff. Hence, I'm a creature of habit there. And probably... the Simpplr app, actually, last but not least, because we have our own app and I have it on my phone and I use it quite a bit.
Oh, Donald, what are yours? Are they going to be super businessy like Miriam's? I'm just kidding. What do you got?
No. Mine are not nearly as businessy. Mine would be text messages because I feel like my wife texts me all the time. I would say WhatsApp recently because my brother just moved back to Germany with my sister-in-law, my nephew. What are the other 3? Audible, I do read a lot. I would say the Apple Podcast app. I'm a huge How I Built This Guy Raz fan. So I listen to that. And then what is the last one? I'd probably say email, but that's just because, I have OCD of collecting too many emails. It's just when people if I see someone present their screen and they have 700 or I'm losing my so I'm you gotta go clean that up. Please clean that up. So yeah, I try to stay on top of the emails too.
Well, I think it's super evident that you both really care about people. I mean, it could have been oh yeah, it's Candy Crush and this other thing that I had him, but both of you were connecting to people. That makes total sense to me. Well, only one more. I love this question. And you can put on your X-Files hat or existential hat, or I don't know, angels in the sky hat. Like what's a mystery like that we don't know the answer to that you would want to know the answer to? How about Donald? What
Ladies
do you got?
first. Ladies first.
I would say beauty before age, Donald.
All right. That was
No, gosh, what would I say? I'm a very scientific person. I'm quite logical. I've got science kind of background, so I like a lot of data. I like a lot of proof. I guess I would like to just know, is there life out there on other planets? I'd like the definitive proof, because it's so vast. I believe there is, but I don't have the data yet to prove that belief.
I love that.
That's good.
Yeah.
All right, I'll give one serious one and then one funny one, just because I want to balance our intellectually intimidating friend over here. So the serious one would be, if the Adam and Eve story is true, what fruit was actually eaten? Because everyone says apple, and I'm like, apple's getting a bad rap out here. Like, so, I'd be curious to see if the story is true, what fruit was actually eaten. And then, like, the funny one would be, like, the mystery for me to solve is, why do they call it take a dump and runny nose? You actually leave the dump. You leave the dump, and your nose doesn't run anywhere. There's no legs. So I want to know, like, who came up with that term originally? I got to know where that came from. So that's my serious one and my funny one.
We're going to have a great conversation. That's perfect.
That's a good one.
All right. Well, then moving in, based off of your experience, I'm really excited to get to know you a little bit more, but just understand both of your experiences, especially when it comes to leadership. So, Donald, you mentioned in a previous call that you're very intentional as a leader. Can you sort of fill us in on what you mean by that?
Yeah, I guess I should say, first and foremost, I have personally benefited from leaders who have taken the time to pour into me. Like, any success that I've had thus far, the overwhelming majority of it is attributed to people who literally took the time. And so what I realize is the throughput, regardless of age, gender, or what time in my life they were my leader, or if they weren't directly my leader, but they were a leader who just took an interest in me. What I realize is, like, the common thread is intentionality. They found ways to make me sharper, to help me smooth out my edges as talent. And more importantly, like, they took a vested interest in making sure that over time that I actually got better, that I actually developed. And so I think for me, as leaders, I feel like we have a responsibility to help shape the world that we want to live in and what world we want to leave behind. And to me, I think it starts with being very intentional, especially to your point earlier, Shawn, around, Miriam and I really talking about people. That shines through, because I think that's just who we are. And I think a part of the reason we're that way is because of the intentional humans that have poured into us. So to me, I think that's a responsibility leaders have to embrace.
Yeah. Miriam, what do you think?
Yeah, no, and what you said, Donald, really resonates. I think I would add advocacy has been really important, I know, in my career. And, especially earlier in my career, I mean, even now in my career, but certainly earlier, coming through as a female leader, often the first and only on leadership teams and that kind of thing in many circumstances, and wouldn't have progressed and developed in the way I did if it wasn't for very intentional mentoring, coaching, from a lot of my male allies, actually, in the businesses I was in. When I joined, there was a lot more male leadership, but I had a lot of great mentors and advocates for my career. And I think, and part of that advocacy for me is, and I try and, practice this, as we know, leadership is a lifelong lesson, we're never done, is the gifts of feedback that I've had. I can still remember where I was and who gave me really important feedback, and some of it very at the time, oh God, that hurt to hear that. But really super valuable, and things that truly made me better. Like you said, Donald, kind of, smoothed off some edges maybe, or, just helped me understand something about myself or approach something differently that meant it went better. And I just filed all of those things away and then, keep on passing that on as well.
Do you think there are, I love that. Have you run into maybe an odd question? Like, it sounds like there's not really accidental leaders. Is that what you're kind of suggesting? I'm just accidentally a good leader. Like, you have to put effort into it. You have to focus on people. You have to, I don't know if it's coming up with a plan, but just being, more intentional. I don't know. Have you experienced accidental leadership type of thing, Miriam?
I don't know. When I hear that, I immediately think, go to that big debate of nature, nurture, like, are leaders born or are they made?
Yeah.
And I think it's a bit of both, but I think it's more about, it's more about just who you are as a human. I think it's a lot of, I grew up with just a lot of lessons around kindness, around empathy, around treat everybody the same, about really important lessons about fairness. And I think if you carry a lot of good core values just as a human, quite honestly, into the workplace, I think those can stand you in good stead. So the nature nurture, have I met and worked with leaders? And I've done a lot of that because I consulted for over 3 decades. So I met a lot of great leaders. I met a lot of not great leaders, but a lot of great leaders. And
Name
I think
them.
there was some of them where, yes, let's do that. My top 10 leaders. It was kind of like you got the idea that some of them were just instinctively so good at certain things. Mm-hmm. But I think it's, they were instinctively good at certain things, but nobody's great at everything. So, mm-hmm. I think it's a mixture. I think some people, just have natural gifts around certain things. But I am a big believer, because I think this is a big opportunity area to create more diversity in leadership. They aren't born. They aren't all just born as great leaders. You can develop your leadership skills no matter who you are. And so I think it's a blend of both.
Yeah. Donald, is it like Miriam brought up some of those points, which I really love, on like fairness, like equitable empathy, like kindness, those things that feel fuzzier. Like, can you teach people that? Like, can you teach people, like, when in leadership roles to be that way? Donald.
Yeah, I think you can. I think to Miriam's point around nature and nurture, I do think some of us are born with certain instinct abilities, but what I have found with many of the leaders that I would put on my top 10 list, their greatest skills were acquired over time.
Oh,
and someone had to nurture those. Either they were nurtured by way of incentive, either they were nurtured by way of recognition, either way they were nurtured by way of feedback. But the greatest skills that the greatest leaders have been acquired over time. And so, to your point, there's a gentleman that I work with. His name is Jason. He's a phenomenal human being. And we were recently talking about this CEO that he worked with. And that CEO is still CEO of a publicly traded company. So I will refrain from sharing that gentleman's name. But Jason remembered early on when they were at the company, how the CEO of that company said that gentleman was going to be a CEO.
Oh, interesting.
And the beautiful thing about the CEO saying that is, number one, who identified the talent? The current sitting CEO, right? But because the current CEO said it, everyone around that person's orbit took a vested interest in making sure that gentleman was developed. And so, was he born to be a CEO? To be determined. Was he definitely nurtured to be a CEO? Absolutely. He was on all of the development programs. And so Jason really used that as an illustration to tell us around who are we nurturing over time and who are we developing. You have no clue like what that trajectory could look like, simply because as a leader, you bestowed that title or that label on someone. And so for me, I think it's a combination of both.
Believing in somebody is really, really, really powerful. Like that story, being able to point that out, that's remarkable. Yeah, I love that.
I think if we all look back, many of the opportunities that I've been given have been given to me because leaders brought my name up in rooms that I wasn't physically in. And so I think the nurturing that those folks have afforded me over time is just something that, I mean, I literally can't repay it. And so the only thing I can do is then hopefully contribute to the next set of leaders and hopefully afford them the same opportunities, hopefully more than I was given. But yeah, I recognize that at least in my arc or in my story.
Yeah. And I just want to come back, Shawn, you said belief. I think it's so important because I think it's a very relatable human thing. If you think to any time in your life, you go back to your childhood, your teacher or family member who had a bigger picture of you than you had of yourself at any point in your life and your career, and how that made you feel. You know, when you have those moments or those experiences, it makes you feel proud. It makes you feel like you want to do better. It makes you feel like appreciated, seen, all those things. And then the opposite is very damaging as well. Those times, and I'm sure, you know, if you're human, you've had them, where somebody made you feel small. Somebody thought less of you. Somebody assumed things about you just because of, you know, your gender, how you showed up, whatever, and how that made you feel and how damaging that is. And so, you know, I think that belief is really important, that positive belief, that support, the advocacy, because at the end of the day, it's how people blossom. It's how we kind of step into that bigger version of ourselves with support, with advocacy, and how we all grow and learn. And you know, having more of those experiences is in your career and in your life is always a good thing.
Yeah, you know, that reminded me of, like, you saying that reminded me that changed the trajectory of my life completely at one point, where I was failing miserable English class sophomore year. I think I had gotten a 33% on like a grammar test or something. The teacher said, we're going to have to hold you back unless you do extra credit. I want you to keep a journal. I want you to do the writing. And when I gave that to her, she said, we're focused on the wrong thing. Like, you're a remarkable writer and you're going to be remarkable at doing this. And I just needed to hear it, I think, at that point. You know, went to AP English. I'm a creative writing major. Like, I went back and told her. She was shocked, but it was just that one thing of her saying, no, you're really good at this, even though it was the thing I was failing miserable at in another way. I see that all the time. Well, Donald, one other thing, you talked about building a high performance index. And I hear, listen, the high performance culture and like slow to hire, quick to fire, like all these things that kind of come with that. Break down what you mean by a high performance index. What does that process look like? What does that look like?
Yeah. So let me first give you the origin story. I was talking to a good friend of mine named Chris, and we were talking about, like, Miriam, you would have enjoyed this conversation. Like, we thought about this. If you could start a company that tracked who originated ripples, right? So like Miriam now is a chief people and experience officer. But if you track her story back, who started the ripple effect? Who led to the many humans along the way that helped you get or achieve where you are today? And like, if there was like a company that could track that, it would be amazing. Because like, if it was like a stock exchange and they were index funds, I would invest in people who had a history of creating positive ripples in the lives of others or in companies. Like, there's something there, it's something to that. And so the idea around high performance indexes, so many leaders talk about high performance and they have very different definitions of what it actually means. And most of the time it's actually used in one of only two ways. Despite having various definitions, most people use high performance to fire people and say they're not high performing, or they use it to promote the ones they want to promote and say they are high performing. And so this idea around, like, okay, if you look at companies, most companies that are publicly traded, they have an earnings call. Private companies, while they may not have an earnings call, they have board meetings. But the financial data or the financial performance of a company is actually a lagging indicator. It's not a real-time indicator or a future indicator of performance, right? Like, it's a lagging indicator of people performance. So we started nerding out around, like, okay, well, like, what are the metrics around high performance and what does that look like? So literally met with like 50 CFOs, some of my favorites like Chad Gold at G2, and really like asked them like, what are the top 25 metrics CFOs track? And then started nerding out for like months around what would be the people predictor of that performance stat line, like literally like nerding out. And I shared it with my buddy Dean, and he took off 2 of the 25 and was like, you could bring this to life. Like, shareholders would invest in trying to figure out which companies were doing the right things around their people and analyzing their people performance, especially if you could see a direct correlation or some level of correlation to financial performance. So it's something that has taken over my life over the last 2.5 years. And my hope is that over the next 2.5 years, we can actually bring this to life. And we're partnering with Northwestern University to help have some of those students pressure test the index, because you got to make sure you have those intellectually intimidating smart people evaluating some of this index. So Miriam, I'll take that as a personal note for myself to share the index with you and have you pressure test it a little bit.
Hey, you're a fellow nerd, so we can nerd out together. That's fine by me.
Miriam, have you looked at anything like that before? That especially, I'm really fascinated by the ripple effect.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's kind of what you're on the search for there, Donald. You know, this is kind of like the Holy Grail. I think we've long known and understood correlations between things like people's intent to stay, people's motivation, and all that kind of thing, and those correlations are strong, and there's really good data around that and all that kind of good stuff. But I sometimes often through my consulting career, when you're trying to convince sometimes executives, CEOs, C-suite CFOs to do something, the people stuff seems squishy. And the soft stuff, I always do that because it's the hard soft stuff. And people intellectually or even, kind of emotionally know it's important because they're humans. CFOs are human, CEOs are human. They get it, but they kind of need more evidence. And so, I think you can bring some data to that today, but I think I'm fascinated by what Donald's doing because I think there is definitely more rigor. And I think there's more possibilities as we think about, we're drowning in data, but we're not kind of floating all the right insights to the surface. And I think I see efforts like you're doing, Donald. It's really about kind of, we've got to, we're in a time where we've got plenty of data. How do we kind of surface those insights that are going to move the conversation forward, move our performance forward, move the employee experience forward in meaningful ways? That's fascinating to me.
Like, it reminds me a little bit of one of Seth Godin's books called Linchpin. Have you read this before, either of you? Oh, it's
read it.
Great.
I've heard of it, but I've not read it.
So it identifies people at a company that are there's like a group of people that are really making the company successful, but they don't necessarily show up as the one that's like slamming the ball. Like, it's assists. Mm-hmm. They're the ones that are somehow motivating a group of people, or the ones that are just always excited and live the vision and have everything pulled in. And it's always seemed to me like those people could be at risk if you measure high performance this certain way. So if you measure high performance strictly on the results, the number of hours, the whatever goes with, but it wouldn't be if you measure it based on the person that's making the points with the ball. By the way, I know that you both love sports, and I don't know sports at all, so I'm just doing my best to do an analogy. But you do have that player that's like the one that is always getting the ball to the right person, to shoot the points.
Dude, I think you're spot on. I was at a HR conference, and they had a behavioral psychologist speak, and he spoke about the Miami Heat team that had Dwayne Wade, LeBron James, and Chris Bosh, all in their prime, all on the same team, with a great coach like Eric Spoelstra and Pat Riley, a former coach, in the front office. He asked us which player had the highest plus minus. And plus minus meaning when this person's on the floor, the team is scoring the most and having the least amount of turnovers.
Oh, interesting. Mm-hmm.
Right? So you have a room full of CHROs. Everybody thinks they're super smart. Nobody guesses the right person. The gentleman who had the highest plus minus during that team is a gentleman by the name of Shane Battier, who played team basketball at Duke. And what they talked about is the Duke way of basketball was around free flowing. And so when he got on the court, he cared less about how many points he scored. He cared less about how many highlights he made. His whole goal was to make the team better. And the guy talks about how Shane was able to pull the superstar talent to the side, like LeBron, like Dwayne, and say, hey, you need to get Miriam the ball more, or you're dribbling too much and Shawn's already at a spot. You need to get him the ball faster. And just hearing you talk about linchpin, which I wrote down because I'm going to make sure I read it. Shane Battier was essentially the linchpin of that team. And in many ways, had he not been there, they would not have been nearly as successful. But when that team is talked about, he typically flies somewhat under the radar. The other thing he would do is guard the best player on the other team. And so I think, to your point, we have to figure out those types of humans inside of our organizations, because we have to figure out how do we elevate not just who they are, but their daily practices and behaviors, so we can then go out and develop those habits and behaviors in others.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree with you more. I think for me, it's analogous as well to some of the things, and there's lots of good research around this as we look into the network effect. We're all very familiar with the network effect in our general life and social media with influencers. You have influencers inside your organization, and understanding and knowing who those influencers are. And often they're not ones with the highfalutin titles. But they're the ones that can influence a lot of the business. They're connectors. If you do you can do network analysis and see who's connecting with who. You have super connectors in your organization often that are really important. And I think I don't know, that's something you're looking into with your HPI, Donald. But I think getting into those kinds of behavioral networking insights can be really helpful, because I'm a big believer. That a lot of people write about you need to know you top stars are and all this kind of thing. Every team needs a Steph Curry, but if you had 5 Steph Currys on the court at one time, you're never going to win. You need Draymond Green, you need Iguodala. He's not there anymore, but he was one of my favorites. To come off the bench. But yeah, we can talk basketball, Donald. Shawn could just listen in.
This is great. Yeah.
But you get what I'm saying, and I think I'm a believer. It's about helping how you learn from the people who are making the biggest difference wherever they are in the organization, and in the way they're making a difference. It's not all one way, like you were alluding to, Shawn. It's not just all about I'm bringing in the dollars, I'm ringing that bell. You can contribute. Everybody contributes to performance in so many different ways depending on their role.
That reminds me of like just looking over. I was working on something different, so I was looking over the Gallup research on engagement, and I think it was this year's report comes back that 20% of people feel lonely at work. Mm-hmm. They suffer from loneliness outside, and how do you fix that if not with people that what'd you call it, Donald? It's like the plus minus. Is that like a stat?
Yeah, plus minus
on what they have. Yeah, and finding out who those people are. Or just championing that. I've never seen that. You mentioned, Miriam, that you could track that, like some of the network effect, things like that. I've been doing this a long time, but I've never seen that. Like, is that something you do at Simpplr, that you're able to identify that or identify who those linchpins are?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's something that. First of all, I've done some of that work in my consulting career for organizations where we've built kind of ways of surfacing their own data around what their network effects are. And in Simpplr, I can see some of that through the insights from the analytics I'm able to get when we look at who's commenting on things, who's how they're responding to content or communications that are going out. You can see who your influencers are. You can actually get insights on who's publishing the most, who's posting the most. And not to say that also therefore always translates into impact, but it gives you something to work with. You can start to kind of see that. So, certainly there's some things, other tools as well that can help you surface that. And I think, I love the path that you're on with the work that you're doing, Donald, because I think we're just at the beginning of really understanding that, certainly in the workplace. We're scratching the surface, and I think AI especially is going to give us a lot more possibilities there. But coming back to your point about loneliness, by the way, that 20% who say they regularly feel lonely in the workplace, it's the same in society as well. So workplaces are, often a reflection of society. It's 20% globally that say that. And it always saddens my heart when I hear that, whether it's in the workplace or outside of the workplace. And I think it's most definitely something both, societal, but also in the workplace, that you have first of all, a duty of care as an organization to change those things. And you also know that if people are expressing that, whether they're expressing loneliness or disengagement or frustration or whatever, they're not able to do their best work. And I think that's something that you've got to pay attention to.
I talked to a friend of mine who was the emergency call operator, New York City. And you get to the point that he starts talking about weird calls that come in and strange things. And then you have a kind of a Donald mindset on why we call it taking a dump or leaving a dump. You just get morbid, like in what you ask. Yeah. And then finally I asked, what are the worst calls? Like, what are the hardest calls? And he said, it's the ones where people call up just because they want somebody to talk to. He says it's devastating when they call up. And it's just loneliness. And they'll even say, like, I just needed somebody to talk to, so I dialed 911 in order to talk to somebody.
It breaks your heart, doesn't it? But it just reminds us how, we know this, but we forget it, I think, as we travel through life and we all get so busy, how even the smallest things can mean so much. I've spoken at times, I'm sure I'll have, I've spoken to neighbors or people that I come up, in touch with through other things I do outside of work. And I say, you're the first person I've spoken to today. And you just think, because we crave that naturally. And so it's a real thing. We know it. It damages your mental health, your physical health. Being lonely is as bad as smoking 15 cigarettes a day to your health. I think it was Cigna did a study on that on one of the big health plans. It's a real issue, and it's a workplace issue, obviously a society issue as well. But we've got to work at it, and I think it's getting harder because we're not having as many of these in-person interactions. I think that's adding to it as well. Yeah,
Donald, how do you? I mean, loneliness specifically, but just the outside forces of, like, you've got anxiety, you've got the outside forces, you've got people that come into work. How have you managed that, or how do you support your employees in those sorts of situations, or address that as a leader of people in your organization?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's acknowledging that in all of us, there's this deep feeling of, or desire to both be acknowledged and fulfilled. I think about, like, I'm going to date myself a little bit, but one of my favorite shows growing up was called Cheers. And if you listen to the theme song of Cheers, it's, the writer Gary Portnow is basically talking about where everybody knows your name. That's where everybody wants to go. It's why you have your favorite restaurant or your favorite bar or social scene, is because that's there you actually mean something. And we have to acknowledge that in the workplace. I think historically our profession has been rooted on 5 major time periods. It started because of being administrative in nature. And then from administration, we went into compliance. From compliance, we went into employee satisfaction. From satisfaction, you got companies that are focused on how do they engage their employees, mainly through this lens of productivity. And then last, I think the best companies understand that they want people to be fulfilled. And so if you want people to be fulfilled, you got to recognize that there's plenty of talent at your organization that just isn't. There is a large sentiment of loneliness. We have this is the smallest family size we've seen in the Western Hemisphere in history, where the average household is less than 2 people. It's actually 1.6 as of last week. So there's a lot of people out there where their greatest social interaction happens at work. And so we have to figure out, what kind of experience do we want people to have? And so for me, I try to lead with, when I'm not having the best of days, I let people know, like, what am I doing to try to mitigate against that? What is my morning routine like around yoga and meditation? And, when I do have a pick me up, what was it that happened in my children's life that helped pick me up? And how do you look for people in meetings to make sure that you're paying attention not only to the people speaking up, but the people that are not saying anything, because more often than not, those are the ones you got to make sure you're mindful of. And so I think it's this acknowledgement and this responsibility that I do believe I have a responsibility to help people feel fulfilled at work, because I think that's when we get their best and their brightest. And to me, that's what I've used to help facilitate either safe space conversations or making sure that I do I call them table for 10, where I'll connect with 9 other people in the org, but trying to make sure that I'm prioritizing not just the business side of the business, but the fulfillment side of the business. Because, Miriam can probably tell you this better than I can, but there was a study that came out that said the average human, if you live to be 75, you end up working 90,000 hours, which equates to almost a third of your life. I just think it would suck for all of us to work a third of our life and that third not be fulfilled. And so, in this role and in many roles like it, I feel like people like Miriam and I, we have an extra duty to make sure we shepherd that level of fulfillment in people's human experience, but also helping other leaders that may not necessarily sit in people teams or HR teams to help them understand the role and the impact they can have, the ripple effect that they can have in helping other people feel fulfilled as well.
Miriam, thoughts on that? Like my brain goes to it's just a job part of it, like a little bit. And then I'm like, yeah, but you really care about your job, Shawn. Like you like what you do.
It is. Yeah, it is. And I know, often, and I'm sure you'll have had this done when you work in today, it's like, yeah, but I'm not their therapist. I'm not their, parent. I'm not their whatever. And of course we're not. It's a job. It's a place of work. It's a business. And we're not responsible and accountable for each other's totality of each other's lives. And at the end of the day, like you said, Don, we spend so much time at work. We have a mantra that we aspire to, because every organization's a work in progress here at Simpplr, which is when work is good, life is better. And so I think it's about optimizing as best you can, as you say, that workplace experience, Donald. We can't solve for anything. We can't solve everything, but we can support, we can listen, we can make sure we're doing the best thing possible to equip people, either individuals to, develop resilience or, think about how they think about their own careers, and equipping managers in that way as well. We can't take on everything, but I think some of it is like some of the examples you gave there, Donald, is also just, helping equip managers, starting with managers, especially because we know they're so important to the employee experience. The whole Gallup research about 2017, they account for 70% of engagement in the workplace, and they do. Is just equipping leaders to be the best possible leaders they can be. And sometimes that means having some of those difficult conversations, giving people space and grace when they need it. And it's very relatable human experience. Because if I did if we got into kind of big sharing mode, I'll tell you without going into all the gory details. I've gone through work, and I'm sure you've all got stories where I walked into work the day after my first marriage broke up and carried on like nothing had happened, feeling devastated. And pretended like nothing was going on in my life. And it was the most devastating thing at the time. Or I've gone in after a parent died, or a good friend died, and just pretended like, yes, I would show up, I would get on that plane, but I wasn't okay. And, we've all done those. We all know people, or we've ourselves been in that place where you've been sick, you've had a health concern, your kid's been sick, whatever it is. There's always all those other things going on in life that affect us in the workplace. And sometimes, like you were saying, Donald, it could be something very small, like, how are you doing? And just giving people that time to just talk a little bit, or noticing something and saying, you know what, we've got a flexible time off policy. I think you need to take a couple of days off. And giving them the support and encouragement to do what they need to do for self-care. It's, those small things in the workplace, as they can in life, like you were saying earlier, Shawn, that just, this person's the first person I've spoken to today, that loneliness connection. They can make such a difference, and they can be turning points for that individual to feel supported, to help them in the moment. And I think we've just all in life and in work just got to be attuned to that and be kind. Do the right thing and be kind.
I get the impression from both of you that it's not only hey, I'm going to ask questions, or I'm going to find out, or I'm going to initiate the conversation, but you can create a culture or an environment where somebody feels comfortable sharing that with you even without you asking. So like I've experienced the same TMI, right? Oh yeah, my first marriage, and but I've experienced.
We'll have to swap stories later, Shawn.
I know. I experienced the same thing where you come in and you don't say anything because you're afraid that like nobody cares about this, or will this affect my performance, or is this just going to bring everybody else down? And then I've worked at places where that human connection of like I'm a human being and I'm trying to figure out my purpose and I'm trying to figure out what's important to me and these things happen to me in my life, that builds an enormous amount of trust with both of them. Donald, you're giving people advice based off of why you're grumpy, not just I'm grumpy today, but I'm grumpy and here's what I'm going to try to do about it, and ice cream will be involved, right? Like that's that's really powerful to me, being able to do that. Donald, any other thoughts on this?
No, I love what Miriam said. Their slogan is internally, or that catchphrase around when work is good, life is better. I couldn't agree more. And look, I think a part of this is if you think about some of your favorite memories and your favorite places with your favorite people, you always felt safe there. There's just maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, companies started talking about authenticity and telling people to be their most authentic self. But if the environment is not safe, people are not going to be their most authentic self. And so part of my signaling when I'm not having the best day, or I want people to know, like, I might need grace today, Shawn. If you're looking for me to be the encourager, which I normally am, like 99% of the time, but that 0.1% time, like, I want to make sure that the people around me feel safe enough to know, like, hey, today Donald, he's not bringing the juice. He doesn't got that energy today. And I think it creates just this environment where people know, like, when they are then walking through those same feelings or emotions, that they are now in a safe environment to signal that to the rest of us that we work with. And in most times, you don't have to solve their pain. They just want to know that you actually care. They don't need you to go solve, to your point around it still being a workplace, Miriam.
Yeah.
Most of the time, people just want to know that you care.
Yeah. No, it's that human connection we crave so much. I mean, there's I forget who did it now. I'm a bit research junkie, as you can probably tell. There was a piece of research done around loneliness, and it was you were over 300% more likely to stay and want to stay where you are if you've got one person you count as a friend at work. Just one. That's all it takes. And then it goes up, actually, the more connected you feel after that. So if you have one person that, I can think of workplaces where I had many, many good friends I've had over decades from my work life. And then there's other situations I've been in where you don't feel as connected. And we know which ones we prefer and which ones make us want to bounce into the office or onto our laptop on the Monday morning because you enjoy the people you're working with and you have a good, the English expression is you have a good crack together, you have a good laugh together as well as get a lot of work done. It makes a difference, but it's those small things. It's not a huge thing just to say I've got one good friend at work, or it's a big thing to say I feel psychologically safe at work. But small things help you feel that and believe that, and it's those small actions that happen. To your point about culture, Shawn, culture to me is kind of just if you have lots of people with similar habits, that becomes the culture. So, it's habit creating. So if managers in general are good at creating psychological safety in an organization and they have a habit of practicing that, then people will generally report that's a cultural trait here. I feel really included and I feel like I can be my authentic self because it's very psychologically safe here. It doesn't just happen because you say it. It happens because people have healthy habits around that on a daily, moment-to-moment kind of basis.
When we talk about this, I'm picturing in my head knowledge workers. Like I'm picturing in my head, the Russian lit majors that got jobs in tech. But this applies across the board. You got, warehouse workers, you got frontline workers, you've got mechanics, you got people doing like God's work. That's the same across the board. This isn't just, hey, you can afford to have a friend at work. Is that right, Miriam? Like the loneliness, what we're talking about, that's across the board.
Yeah. No, 100%. And, it's upwards of 70% of the world's jobs are deskless. of whatever form, whether that's, you're in a warehouse, you're driving a truck, you're doing deliveries,
Huge.
you're in a hospital, you're not sat at a desk behind a laptop, when you're in those kinds of roles and many more besides. That's the majority of the workplace experience. Not the likes of three of us who, walk down to our home office or occasionally go into a office, and plug in a laptop.
Yeah.
We're the minority, even though we get talked about, I think, more. So yeah, and it's the human condition that is what is common. And even though people who work in remote jobs or just remotely all the time, from their home office, we do report feeling lonelier. So it's 25% versus the 20%. And people who are in the office all the time report feeling less lonely at work. It's around 15 or 16%, I think. Still, but 15 to 16% still report feeling lonely, even though they're around people all the time, which is interesting. So yes, it's a bigger problem if you're fully remote.
Yeah.
But it's a problem in all circumstances because it's the human condition. It's not about where you work that makes you feel lonely. I mean, hands up if you've been in a room full of people and still felt lonely.
Oh yeah,
it happens.
Yeah, unfortunately,
it's not about where you are. Loneliness is it's external factors and it's internal factors. It's not one thing.
How about you, Don? Do you have to shift your strategy and measuring like the ripple effect and finding out who those people are that are doing the assist? Do you switch that based off of whether it's a frontline deskless worker, or is it the same for you as well? That it's just the human condition.
Look, I think the foundation is definitely a human condition, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say I think most companies get this wrong when it comes to what Miriam was stating, which is most of the research is done on what we have, accepted and have labeled as knowledge workers.
Yeah.
My concern is that not only are I call them skilled workers because they typically have some level of expertise that most of us just don't have.
Yeah.
But we haven't been as mindful about the experience they have at work because the work that they do doesn't require them to go into one dedicated physical location. And so it's easy to have the old adage, out of sight, out of mind. Mm-hmm. And so I do think you have to figure out ways to curate their experience as well, and making sure that they too are equally deserving of the intentionality that you would have for people that do, park their time and talent behind a desk. And so I think we have to, as a society and as a community, I think we have to grapple with that and try to figure out, what does that look like for the person on the UPS truck, or what does that mm-hmm. look like for the barista at Starbucks? Like, how do you ensure that they also have the same level of connection to the company? And often that means curating experiences that are tailored to the environments that they're in, which looks very different sometimes from those that are, quote unquote, knowledge workers. So, I do think in its foundation, it's rooted on humanness, but I do think there's some level of customization that's required in order for them to have that same level of connection. Because look, there's tons of studies on proximity bias and what happens when you do report to an office. The connections that you may have with like a senior executive like Miriam is very different from the person that may not have to go into the same Simpplr headquarters every day. So how are you somewhat like mitigating against that intentionally to make sure that everyone has that same type of experience? So I do think you have to modify that a little bit and figure out what works for them.
Bespoke. Yeah, the hard question around this, or the one that I'm most interested in then, is if you have leaders, and we know that when they do create, I can't believe I'm using that word, bespoke experiences for the folks, or like they're intentional about it. Don, you brought this up a little bit earlier when you said the word incentive. Like, how do you incentivize people that go into management roles, that go into leadership roles, that go into the C-suite? How do you incentivize them to be more human, to be more intentional, to care about the loneliness epidemic we're looking at, or to care about essential workers that haven't become essential workers again, that it's slipped? Like, what do you do to incentivize them? Donald, like, what have you been looking at?
Yeah, I think first, you have to have qualitative measures. Most companies look at quantitative measures when evaluating performance or recognizing and incentivizing performance. I think you have to have a qualitative component that
Yeah.
is centered around people. And to that end, mine can't be in contradiction with Miriam if we're on the same team. Because if so, we just incentivized her not to be part of the team, to only focus on her team and not mine. So you got to have those qualitative measures. I think who you promote, who has more, share of voice. I think there's three companies that I know have done this really well. UPS, at one point, you couldn't become an executive if you never sat on a truck. Nike, their current CEO, Elliot, started out as an intern. I think that's amazing because he can speak to the many jobs that it took to get to CEO. And there's another gentleman, another apparel company, Chris Davis, who's the president and chief marketing officer for New Balance. Despite his parents owning the majority shares in New Balance because it's a privately held company, they didn't give him an easy road. Like, he had to start doing the entry level work and work his way up. And I think there's something to that because it then promotes to the organization that they value that level of leadership, that you have a certain level of connectedness, not just with knowledge workers, but also with skilled talent as well. And I think that's the second one. I'm also mindful of, like, when I graduated high school, the only people that got talked about in the graduation ceremony pamphlet were people that were either going in the military or people who had scholarships. And I think we missed the ball. Like, if I could go find my Principal Dubowski, I would tell him I think we missed it because there were plenty of people that right now they're buying baby boomer businesses because they went into the trades. They're super skilled. Many of them have done financially well off, but we didn't celebrate those professions. Yeah. And I can see how that could have been detrimental to who they are because we basically were saying if you went into the military or if you got, scholarships at some of the biggest schools or Ivy League schools, then you were worthy of recognition, right? Yeah. But if you went into the trades, if you went into skills, you weren't necessarily as worthy as said recognition. So to your question, Shawn, around how do you incentivize that, I think we got to recognize those wins as well. Recognize, the truck driver that has zero safety incidents over 1 million miles driven, whether you're at a, Coca-Cola down the street from me or UPS. How do you celebrate that? How do you celebrate those linchpins inside the organizations that may not have fancy titles in front of their names, but when the people want to rally around a certain common voice that drives the culture, it's those individuals. And so I think we got to figure out how do we incentivize it and tie it qualitatively, but also then celebrate it in shared spaces the same way we celebrate others.
Yeah. How do you do that qualitatively? Miriam, I was just curious. I was like, how do you do that qualitatively?
No, I think it's it's some things that Donald already mentioned. I mean, it's who you celebrate and who you recognize and who you tell stories about in your organization. It says a lot about what you value, what your values are. It becomes almost like the oral tradition, the oral history of that company. And for me, that's a really valuable part of culture. In my consulting days, when I was doing a lot of work around, organization culture and change, I was always it felt like a culture detective, when I first was getting to know a company and meeting the people and learning about how they operated and their programs and, how they use their physical space. All of the above tell you something about this place. But one of the biggest, most important things I would ask people is say, tell me the 2 or 3 top stories that get shared here with new hires. Mm-hmm. And there's an amazing commonality between the ones that people who've been there for a while say, oh, well, yeah, the time when, the CEO did this, or the time when, that happened and how we responded as a company, that really said something. Yeah. So I think it's who you recognize, the stories you tell and the stories you share. And it's not just for leaders, you posed the question around leaders, Shawn, but I think how you answered it was right, Donald. It applies to everybody. Yeah. It's criteria for promotion, based on what criteria, who and how do you get promoted? And I think very importantly, although I can cite examples I'm sure we all have in our career where despite that, people have promoted some, well, yeah, but their numbers are great. Yeah. Yet, they get the worst ranking as a people manager, and everybody kind of knows they're a bit of a jerk or whatever it is. But their numbers are really good. When you do something against the grain of what you want and aspire your culture to be, that's also very telling, and people will remember those things. And one of the things, it's a bit of a cliche, but what you kind of tolerate is what you get as your culture in part as well. And so I think the other side of that is important to pay attention to. Hold up your heroes, tell all the good stories, recognize people appreciate criteria for promotion, but be very aware of, some of that. What you tolerate is what you get as well. But it's hard to manage it all, as we know, Donald, especially you've got a bigger organization than I do. You can't manage everything that moves, but you just try and put the best systems and, processes and oversights and set up the right conversations so that you minimize those kinds of risk opportunities happening.
Yeah, I know not everybody, we've had other guests on, do performance reviews or manage performance in the same way. But that traditional sort of, doesn't meet expectations, meets some, exceeds, things like that. It becomes really powerful if somebody's just killing it numbers wise, or killing it, just knocking stuff out, but they get a meet some because how they do it is just like burning through the organization. Then speaks volumes, I think, when something like that happens. Well, I got it. Sure. I'd be remiss if I don't talk about AI. I know this is something, Miriam, you've looked at a lot and talked about. And listen, I work at an AI company, so I get AI'd out these days. But I am curious when we're talking about, I guess, increasing employee satisfaction, increasing employee engagement, creating more connection between humans using the robots. Like, Miriam, what are you seeing that's making that possible when it comes to AI?
Yeah, and I say it, yeah, it's kind of a tongue in cheek, isn't it? Every podcast has to mention AI at the moment. I would say we're still fairly early days in this, so I know everybody's talking about AI. Let's be honest about this. We're relatively early. When we look back in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, we'll realize that this wasn't when it all kind of came to fruition. It's when it started. It's like when we started with the internet, everybody got rightly very excited about the possibilities, but you couldn't have imagined where we took it and where it went. And I think that's the same with AI. But I think some of the things that I'm at least optimistic about is one of it is what we've touched on already, which is the power of insights from data that AI can give us, which will help us answer some important questions like, how do we get people better connected? Who are our super connectors? Who's out there feeling isolated? Maybe not voicing it, but we can see from the data that they are, or they're not connected in the way we need them to connect to function really well. So I think getting those kind of insights, AI is going to help us elevate more of that. I hope we don't get to the dystopian place where your AI assistant is your friend and your best friend at work. I still want that to be
and you don't know that it's an AI assistant. Yeah.
I know. It's like you think you're talking to that lovely coworker, Donald. He's such a friendly guy, but really it's just all AI. But hopefully we don't get to that place. But I think, joking aside, I think what AI is already, and this is some of our earliest use cases, taking out some of those routine. AI is good right now. It learns rules. It's good at repetitive things. It's better at repetitive things than we are as humans. We make more mistakes around some of those repetitive things. So I think as it takes more of those on, I think hopefully it will give us those productivity gains, meaning just time back, that we can focus on things that are more impactful to performance in a different way, to the human experience in the workplace, to giving, leaders, managers room to breathe, to be better managers. Because I know that's kind of the blight of managers saying, well, I don't have time for all this people stuff. I think it's going to hopefully give us some more of that breathing space. And I hope we harness that in the right way. Those are a couple of things that I'm very excited about. There's that productivity release, hopefully it can give us to focus on things that are more impactful for us as humans. And then that insight piece that I think it can give us as we truly get to some answers that we haven't been able to answer yet.
Yeah. Donald, how do you feel about the robots? How are you using him?
I am a robot. I'm just
I mean, the video's going to get that good. We'll be like, hey, he looks real.
I know, right? I mean, I would underscore the same sentiments as Miriam. I think most humans right now are still grappling with the potential impact that AI can have. And typically, when you see societies introduce new innovations, whether it be going from agriculture to the industrial revolution, whether it was the internet or even now artificial intelligence, I mean, there's a large portion of society that is essentially scared and fearful. And I understand why, in the sense that it's something new, but similar to Miriam, every time humans on this planet have had to evolve, we've always risen to that challenge. And so I think this is just another challenge of us trying to figure out, we have an opportunity to accelerate the fulfillment that people have in the human experience. We really can really revolutionarily change the way that people work every day. And that this technology has allowed us to do that. And, whether you're Sam Altman or you're Alan Turing, I'm appreciative for both because of their contributions to the technology. But I agree with Miriam, we're so early on. But I think this allows us to truly dream about, okay, what do we want that interaction between companies and talent to look like moving forward? And then how can we make sure that we're deploying the technology in a way that automates some of the mundane or routine things? Or how do we elevate the right insights in order for us to be able to move quicker and more swiftly, but make more sound decisions? So I'm personally excited. I typically run towards the eye of the storm, not away from it. But I just want to make sure, for the listeners that may be listening and they're struggling in grappling with that, I get it, because we also have something else that's rather unique. Is the generational continuum of people in the workplace has never had this varied of personas. Humans are living longer. And so what may be default for some when it comes to working with technology and evolving is completely different for others. And so I think there's a responsibility for companies to somewhat create the testing space, the environment for people to build that level of comfort. My favorite jeans are Levi's, and just to hear that this gentleman didn't start the company so I can go buy jeans from him was just hilarious to me. I was like, what do you mean? It's like, he didn't have me in mind when he knew I wanted a dark wash 507. And I think that's what's happening with AI is what it may have intended to be, the way we deploy this could literally radically change the human experience for a positive way. And so I hope that we all rise to that occasion the way that we always have on this planet.
There's an irony in there, which I really love, is that the robots are AI, and I agree with both of you that it's giving us the opportunity, if we can take it and we use it, to be more human than we have been for the past 200 years. So it's the Industrial Revolution. Here's the opportunity to connect. So I
100%.
I love that. I appreciate that.
I would bet on human intelligence. Oh, sorry, Shawn. I would bet on human intelligence over artificial intelligence any day of the week.
Well, both of you, very inspiring. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared and talking through this. I hope we get to chat again. Donald, I'll say oh no, Donald, let's connect. And then we'll run into each other at a conference 5 years from now. And you'll remember, hey, Shawn, remember when you said that? And then you never connected. But yeah, please stay in touch. And Miriam, you're a wealth of knowledge, your experience, the consulting, the stuff that you've worked on. It's just been really enlightening for me, and I think super enlightening for the listeners. So thanks again, both of you.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
No, thank you for having us.
All right. So in closing, where do we find you? Where do we find out more about you, what you're working on, the books and the films and the index that you're making? Donald, you first.
Oh, man. All right. This is cool. I'm on literally every social platform as Donald F. Knight. No, the F is not for Francis. It is for Franklin, because my grandmother had an affinity for Benjamin Franklin. So, yeah, Donald F. Knight on LinkedIn. That's where I'm at. And if you want to email me, I don't mind, because this is great listeners. And I told Shawn that I would let you all connect with me. So donald.knight@wbd.com. Reach out to me. Would love to stay connected.
Awesome. Miriam?
Mine's a little more slimmed down, but for business contact, LinkedIn is where to find me. My email's also on there too, and I'm happy, always love connecting. It's community is what matters to the human race, so I'm a fan.
Perfect. All right, thanks.